are so happy to welcome all of you to our session on the magic of writing middle grade for the Trinity Prep Author Fest. And in this panel, we have Janae Marks, who is the author of From the Desk of Zoe Washington and A Soft Place to Land, and Christine Morale, who has written The Kingdom of Secrets, and Jess Redmond, who has written The Miraculous, Quintessence, and The Adventure Is Now. And so I'm super excited to have all of you here and to talk about kind of the ins and outs of writing for this really unique group. I think middle grade, as a middle school teacher, it's an amazing, but also can be a really challenging time. And I think that books are so important for middle grade readers. Sometimes it's not the most magical time of their lives, but I think as authors, y'all are able to pull them into the pages of books and help them to kind of forget some of the craziness that's going on in their lives. So my first question is going to be, and y'all can just jump in whenever, how do you come up with the ideas that really pull your readers into the pages of your books?
I should start. I can start. This is actually an interesting question because my debut From the Desk of Zoe Washington, when I first came up with the idea, I actually thought it was going to be a young adult novel. And it was through starting to write it and sharing it with critique partners pretty early on in the process before I was sharing a few chapters as I was writing them with one of my critique partners for accountability purposes. And they were the ones who were sort of like, I think this might be more middle grade. And so essentially this book is about a girl who ends up finding out that her father, who's been incarcerated her whole life, might actually be innocent of the crime. And so it kind of goes into the idea of wrongful convictions and things like that. And I was inspired actually by a podcast, the podcast Serial, the first season, if anybody's familiar, kind of tells a similar story. So in my mind, I thought, this feels like a topic meant for an older audience, so I just assumed that she should be, and everything that I had written beforehand that did not get published was YA. And so I assumed that Zoe was going to be 16. But after getting that piece of feedback and doing more research and reading a lot more middle grade books that cover, tougher topics, I realized that this really can work for middle grade. It's just a matter of how you execute it. And so, of course, I had to change some things around in my original idea, but ultimately the heart of the story is still the same. And I think what I really appreciated about choosing to do middle grade is just realizing, something about this age group and just the characters are exposed to things for a lot of times the first time. They're experiencing a lot of firsts. So I think that's kind of what I'm drawn to when it comes to coming up with other ideas. A Soft Place to Land came from more of a personal place. It's about a girl who ends up having to move into an apartment across town from the house she grew up in her entire life because her dad recently lost his job. And so they have to kind of move. And I had a similar situation when I was older than her. She's 12 and I was more in high school, but my parents were separating and we had to kind of sell my childhood home and move. And so just dealing with the big move and all those changes. So I think I just try to sometimes remember what it was like to be a middle grader or, middle school kid myself when it comes to coming up with ideas. And so that's kind of in a nutshell how those two books came to be.
Nice. All right, Christine, what about you? How do you pull them into the pages?
Where do your ideas come from is probably the number one question that I get from readers and friends and everybody. And the answer that I always give, I always say I have two answers to this question. And on the surface, they look like a contradiction, right? And number one is, I have no idea where my ideas come from, right? I'm just walking down the street one day and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I got this great idea for a story. I'm going to go home and write it. But the other answer to that question is ideas are all over the place. And what I say, when I go on school visits, is I don't know where ideas come from. I don't know when, how they're going to strike. But what I can do as a writer is make myself a lightning rod. And I can go out into the world, just open my mind up. I say it's kind of like flipping a switch. And one day, you're walking out around town and you're not looking for ideas. You're not going to see them. But once you start looking for those ideas, they are everywhere. And I have pulled a lot of my ideas from history. I don't tend to write historical fiction, but they're just things that stick in your head. Those things, another thing I would say is notice what you notice. So the things that sort of strike you as you're going through the world, if they stick in your head and they won't leave you alone, maybe that's the thing that is sort of begging to be a story. And for me, from Kingdom of Secrets, I heard this random little historical fact that during the Civil War, there was a hot air balloon corps. And I didn't know this. I don't know if this is taught in schools now, or, I didn't know this at all. My husband brought it up, actually. And so I started researching this unit of the Civil War that went up in hot air balloons to spy on the Confederate Army. I just thought that was so cool. But it wasn't like immediately a story. It's just something that developed over time, and it sort of stuck in my head, and that eventually became Kingdom of Secrets, my first novel. So ideas can come from anywhere.
It's true. Jess?
Yeah. And, I think obviously what everybody said, I concur. Ideas come from everywhere. I have always wanted to write middle grade. That was the time that I read the most as a kid. I was just such a voracious, obsessive reader. I was always reading. I was walking into walls because I had books in my hands. I had no sense of direction or where I lived in the city. I lived in Philadelphia, and I was like, I don't know what part of the city, because I never looked out the window when we were driving. I was reading. So I've always loved books from that part of my life, and I've always felt a special connection to those stories. Those are the stories that I feel have shaped me and have stayed with me. So I always knew eventually I wanted to write for that age group. And I've taken ideas from my own childhood, definitely. Quintessence has a girl who moves a big move across the country. I moved from Philadelphia to Florida when I was a kid. And she also has an anxiety disorder, and I was a really anxious kid. And then as an adult, I became a therapist. And so I pull, not directly, I'm not stealing my clients' lives, but I definitely take from the experiences and feelings that I know people who are going through certain things are having. And then it's interesting you talk about, ideas that sort of, they don't come right away and turn into books. We have to figure out how to make that small little spark of an idea into something that a young reader wants to read, wants to turn the pages. So I'd like to share that my newest book, The Adventure Is Now, I actually wrote it like 7 years ago and had it just as this old manuscript that I thought maybe nothing will ever happen with. And I pulled it back out and revamped it, and that became my third book. So sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes you have a story and you think, I wasted all that time, this is never gonna happen. And then you figure out as a writer what kids are looking for and how your voice as an author works, and you're able to sort of breathe life into an idea. So there's timing that goes with it too.
True. Well, Janae alluded to this, and it just feeds right into my next question is, how do y'all tackle kind of the tough topics that are facing middle school students, middle grade readers? How do y'all tackle those in your writing?
Well, for me, I think the first thing I had to kind of remember is that middle school kids are capable of reading books like this. I think, as an adult, you're like, oh, maybe this is too much. But like, I think it's just a matter of like I was saying earlier, the execution, but really like kids are living these things. Like just said, like kids are living with anxiety. Kids are dealing with big moves. Kids are having parents in prison, like they're living these situations. And so I think you should not necessarily, feel like you have to write it to fit them. Like you don't have to, I don't want to use the word dumb, but you know what I mean? Dumb it down so that you feel like it's appropriate. Like, I think you just have to, I think there's certain things you want to still avoid in middle grade. But I think, you just tell the stories authentically and really just think about it from the point of view of a kid. Like that was what was interesting to me, listening to that podcast I mentioned earlier and learning about wrongful convictions. Most of the time it's from the point of view of the person who's in prison or their lawyer and things like that. But I was like, what would it be like to be the kid? How hard would that be? And what would that bring up? And so I think you just kind of have to put yourself into their headspace, and really get it back into your inner middle school self, essentially, when it comes to how to handle it. And then for me, one thing that I like to do is I like to balance it with other more lighter elements in the book. So it's not just the entire book all the way through is super heavy and serious. So in Zoe Washington, she likes to bake, and so there's a lot of baking in there. So it's like two very different things, but like, they get weaved together. So if you're reading a chapter where you just learned about something that's one of the more tougher moments in the book, then in the next chapter, she might be baking something fun. And so it kind of is like a nice little reprieve. And even in something like A Soft Place to Land, where the topic isn't quite as heavy, I think it's just good to have that kind of balance, like have some subplots in there that you can mix in that just add a little bit of extra layers to it to give the reader a little bit of a break from the heavy stuff. Because again, I think that also is normal. A lot of kids are going through tough things, but also just living their regular lives and going to their extracurricular activities and hanging out with their friends and have some happy moments mixed in. So I think it's important to show the full experience and perspective.
Love that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Janae said. I mean, I write fantasy, so the heavy issues are not dealt with as directly. They're kind of like snuck in there. So you're reading about these girls stealing a hot air balloon and going for a flight and it crashes and all this adventure and action. And so as an author, I think it's my job to sort of organically work in those heavy topics so that they're really palatable. And also, you always have to serve the story first. So I always make sure that it makes sense in terms of the story.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance that you're going for. And, I am aware when I'm writing, like, sometimes you do have to pull back. Sometimes you're like, okay, this would be a little bit much. Like, this would be a little bit much for my reader to handle. And I'm not looking to, ruin their lives with this book. So let me pull it back. And I think one of the wonderful things about middle grade too is that we get to include humor, we get to include hope. It is expected that, our stories are going to end with something positive. Our readers are going to walk away feeling like they are empowered and that the world is a place that they can make a difference in. Like, that is sort of one of the main components I think of when I think of middle grade books. And that's how I feel when I read a middle grade book, which is why I love reading middle grade too. So it's nice to be writing in a space where those sorts of things are expected and that's what your readers want. So, like in my stories, some of them do deal with heavy things, like The Miraculous deals with grief. And Quintessence, there is my main character, Alma, has panic attacks. And this one is a little bit goofier. This is like, I definitely got to have a lot of light moments in this one, but this character is also anxious and his parents are separating. So I think that middle grade, we get to have that hope and we get to show kids also, like Janae said, like that the world is balanced, that we are going to go through hard things, that hard things are going to happen. We're going to face obstacles, but that there are good things happening too. And that both of those deserve our attention and deserve, to be acknowledged. So
I think somebody said to be authentic. And I think that is the main thing. I know as a teacher, you've got to be real with your students.
yeah.
If you're not, they're going to know immediately. And I feel like it's the same way on the pages of books, that the kids they can smell when something is off. They can tell if it's not ringing true. And so yeah, y'all are spot on with all that. Just being real and authentic, I think, is really important. All right, this next question is from one of our 6th grade students.
Hi, my name is Tyler. Did you always know you wanted to be a writer? When and how did you figure it out?
I guess we'll go in the same order. So I actually didn't know that I wanted to be a writer growing up. I love to read and I love to write for fun. I did a lot more like journaling, and I used to like write letters to my friends at camp, and I did do some creative writing. Like anytime there's a creative writing assignment at school, I always embrace those. And I do remember like writing short stories sometimes because I used to read those like 17 magazine or those kind of magazines that like you have those contests you can submit to. And it never actually made it in, but I wrote stories for that and it was super fun. But I was just into other things. I just didn't really think about it until I got to college. So that's where I realized I wanted to be an English major, and I started taking more creative writing classes. And then actually going back to what somebody said earlier about why they wrote middle grade, I ended up taking this class my senior year of college called Girls Books. And basically it was like a literature class. We read books featuring girl main characters from, our own childhoods, plus some current ones too. So we read like Little Women and Harriet the Spy and Bridge to Terabithia and Judy Blume, and like kind of discuss some of the themes and, like feminism and just other things that were in there, like from our adult lens. And then like one of our assignments at the end of the class was to write chapters of our own girls book. And so I got a chance to do some creative writing from the perspective of a young child, a younger character. And I just had the most fun writing that. Everything else I'd written in college and creative writing classes was like adult short stories, like about grown-ups. And I was just like, I was never really clicking with what I was writing with, but I was enjoying it. But this was like, I realized like, oh, wow. And then kind of going back to the earlier comment, like I remembered how much these books meant to me as a kid and how much I love them and still love them. So that's kind of where the turning point was for me. And then I decided from there that was a focus I wanted to have with writing.
Yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer, and I've always really identified as a writer, although for most of my life, I didn't know what I wanted to write. I kind of dabbled in different things. I did a little poetry, I did a little short stories, but I didn't really land on anything until my daughter was born. And so similar to what you all are saying, the moment that we brought her home from the hospital, like all the books tell you to do, we started reading to her. And so we read her our favorite childhood books. So we started with like The Phantom Tollbooth and Charlotte's Web and Harry Potter, and sitting there and re-listening to all of those books as an adult, it was just like a moment where everything clicked, and it was like, I want to be writing children's books. Why? How did I miss that? And for the same reasons you said, like these were the books that shaped me into a reader, into a person. And the rest is history. I just started writing children's books from then on. So I always measure my writing career by my daughter because she's 7. It's like, oh, I've been writing for 7 years now. Okay. Like writing seriously. Yeah.
I always knew I wanted to be a writer too. I loved reading from a young age. I loved writing. I would write, like, if I wasn't reading when I was a kid, I was writing. So I always had my little composition notebooks. I was always scrawling out like character lists and like sketching little pictures of who would be in the book and reading through baby name books to pick the perfect name for the character and drawing out the towns that they would live in so that I could accurately, write their routes as they went on their adventures. I had I always wanted that eventually. But then it's so interesting because I did not go to school for English or creative writing. And when I talk to kids about this, when I do like a school visit, I talk about how when I was a teenager, and then as I got older, I started to be more and more critical of myself and my writing. And I started thinking like, well, maybe it's not that good, or like, maybe I'm not great at it. Or, maybe this is something that's just kind of a silly dream and I should like, get like a real job, like get a real degree that has like, a clear path. And I did that. And that was, I've had a lot of good experiences because of that. I majored in political science and I traveled a lot and I'm a therapist, but eventually there was that part of me that was like, but remember how much you wanted to be a writer. And so I finally got up sort of the courage. Again, actually, I was pregnant. I was expecting my daughter and I felt like I have to write a book now because once I have a child, my life is over. Because that's how, I don't know, what I was thinking at the time, and so I like wrote my first book and it was a kid's book. And obviously it didn't immediately get published and like launch me into literary stardom. I still had to like go through all the steps, but that was like the shove that I needed to be like, okay, like I'm an adult now. I need to pursue this thing that I've always wanted to do. So.
All right. What advice would you give your middle grade self? And it could be writing advice or just like life advice.
So since I wasn't really writing as much at that point, I'll just talk about life advice. And I think the number one thing I would tell myself is to just believe in yourself and don't let people walk all over you. Like those moments in middle school where you had, I just have like memories of like those friendships gone wrong and, things that just did not pan out and you just have so much angst about it all. And I think you just wish you had like your more of your adult confidence, I guess, like when you're a kid. So I just wish that I could have just, you know, reminded myself that I was great and awesome. And that if somebody wasn't trying to be, you know, was trying to be not great to me, then that they weren't worth it, you know, and you just got to move on and find your community, which I ultimately did. But you know, like it's hard sometimes when you're in middle school. So that's probably what I would tell myself.
Yeah, I mean, going back to my writing journey, I remember being in high school and having a teacher tell me, you know, oh, you're a great writer, you should keep writing. And I said, but what if I don't know what to say? Like, what if I don't have anything to write about? And he said to me, like, don't worry, it'll come. And at the time, that was very encouraging, and I felt good. And I went out into the world, you know, thinking that. But looking back, I feel like that was maybe the worst advice he could have given me, because I did sort of just wait for it to come. I sort of, you know, going back to that lightning strike analogy, like I was waiting for lightning to strike for decades before I actually said, this is something I'm going to do, I'm going to write. And so I wish I had started earlier. I think sometimes about how my writing career could have been different had I started at a much younger age and really dug in and really taken it seriously. Which is not to say that you have to achieve anything by a certain age or anything like that, but I do wish that I had embarked on this journey earlier rather than sort of waiting around and thinking it would just happen for me.
Great. Yeah, I think that I wish I had started earlier too. But then I'm like, you know, did it matter? Maybe I did things that I needed to do. I don't know. Anyway, I think what I would tell a young person. Oh, okay. So what I would tell a young person in my book, Quintessence, I have a therapist in the story. And so I sort of told Alma the things that I would have wanted to tell a young person, my young self. So one of the things that she says is, Alma asks, she's feeling better, like she's not as anxious. She has like a little bit of a hold on her anxiety. And she says, well, how do I know that it won't come back? How do I know that I'm not going to get as anxious as I was again, and that I'm going to have panic attacks again? And the therapist says, you can never be sure of anything. All you can do is tell your truth, ask for help, give help, and do the things that make you feel like yourself. So that is what I would tell my younger self, is that you can ask for help when you need it. You can give help to people who need help, and you can do the things that make you feel more like yourself and that make you feel strong and powerful.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. So, do you like writing protagonists or antagonists better?
I feel like my books don't really have like an obvious protagonist like character. It's more like the situations and circumstances that are kind of like the antagonist. I guess you could say maybe in Zoe Washington, the mom plays a little bit of an antagonist role just because Zoe feels like her mom doesn't want her to communicate with Marcus, who's her dad in prison and that sort of thing. But like, she's not really, you know, so there's a little bit of that with her, but she's not entirely an antagonist. I just don't think that my books, or at least these two, don't fit that same like model. So I would definitely go with protagonist. But I do see the appeal of writing a fun antagonist though, because you can really dig into all the things that make them quote unquote evil, while also probably writing, you know, the why, you know, kind of going and digging into why they are that way. Cause I think not everybody is so one dimensional. You know, I think you kind of, even if you're writing an antagonist, you have to kind of dig into their origin story. But yeah, I think for the most part, for me, my books tend to focus much more on the protagonist. So I'll pick that.
That is a tough one. I will probably go antagonist. And I will say, so in my book, Kingdom of Secrets, the two girls on the cover, they eventually become friends, but at the beginning they are protagonist and antagonist, because Abby is serving as sort of a foil to the main character, Prismina. And you know, I tend to have like really colorful side characters and really colorful antagonist that the main character kind of bumps up against. So I prefer writing antagonists probably a little bit more.
I like writing protagonists, but like Christine said, I do tend to, like with your side characters, you get to just be kind of off the wall sometimes. Like you can make them a little bit wackier because you don't have to go deep into their psychological depths all the time. So I like writing side characters, maybe more than all of them. Whenever people ask what my favorite character in a book is, it's always like one of the side characters. But these two books do have sort of an antagonist character. And I do like writing that, kind of like Janae said, you get to see sort of the different levels of that person and why they might be acting the way that they are. And I think that is something that's important for everyone to read and understand, sort of why that goes into like the depths of human psychology. Like, why do we act the way that we act, and why are we mean to people sometimes, or why would we pick on somebody? So I don't know that I like writing antagonists more, but I do tend to stick them in there because I do like a good redemptive arc. So I like people to sort of come around and see the light and become better.
Well, and unfortunately in life, no one is completely good and no one is completely evil. And so again, it goes back to that thing that y'all said before, is that you've got to have that balance in all that you do, and you got to keep it real, because it's not always going to be, not everybody's going to be nice, and that's part of life, unfortunately. All right, so this next question is from one of our 7th graders.
My name's Jayla, and my question is, what did you like to read when you were in middle school?
So I have always really been into contemporary. Well, growing up, I liked a lot of things, but my favorite series were the ones that were kind of realistic fiction. And my absolute favorite series in middle school, and probably before that, was the Babysitter's Club series. I loved that. I loved just stories about friendship. I'm an only child, and so I think friendships always just meant so much to me. Even more so maybe than the average, person with siblings, because I didn't have siblings, so that I just like relied on them so much. And so I just love stories about friendship and, navigating that. And I think Babysitter's Club did a great job with that. And yeah, so that was definitely one of my favorites growing up.
And now there's a reboot.
Yes, it's so great.
I'm probably on the opposite end of that spectrum, because I always went in for fantasy. I always wanted that like pure escape, and I went through the world like looking for portals. Like, if I open this cupboard, am I going to be transported to another world? So things like Narnia, like Wizard of Oz, like the old school classics were always my favorite back when I was in middle school.
I liked either fantasy books or books that would make me cry. Those were the 2 categories that I looked for. So like, I loved A Wrinkle in Time. This is my stunning copy from when I was a kid, and I read it probably dozens of times. I was very, very into it, and the whole series and everything that Madeline L'Engle wrote. But then I also like Bridge to Terabithia. I remember reading it and having like an experience, like I remember like feeling like a part of my mind had just been opened, and like, oh my gosh, like all these feelings I had never experienced. I remember crying, and then after that book, I think I was sort of hooked on books that were going to make me have an emotional reaction. Like, I wanted to sort of explore those deeper feelings, some of them that I was probably having for the first time, and thinking about things that I had never thought about at that level. So those were my 2 categories. So the ones that made me cry tended to be more contemporary stories. But if you can get all the emotion in a fantasy like Wrinkle in Time, that's the best of both worlds,
I love this idea of the reading a story being like an experience. Mm-hmm. So what would y'all say to a student that doesn't like to read? How would you encourage them to pick up a book?
Well, I would say, there are so many different kinds of ways to read. I think you don't have to pigeonhole yourself. So for example, you could try reading a graphic novel, which has become so popular nowadays. So like if seeing a page with tons of text on it is just too overwhelming for you, like that's perfectly fine. Like you can read a graphic novel, or even like a novel in verse where something is just a little bit shorter. It might help ease you in, or even a book of short stories, like an anthology, which I feel like is also becoming a little bit more popular in middle grade too. I have a friend who's a teacher who says that that's something that she uses a lot in her classroom for the reluctant readers is anthologies, because it's just a short story. It's only a few pages, but it kind of gets you in. And then I think like experimenting as much as you can, honestly, because you got to find your way in. Like once you find that book, that'll, I'm sure, get you to want to read a lot more. The other thing is don't sleep on audiobooks, like I love audiobooks. I think that they can also be a great way to like get yourself into a story if you feel intimidated by reading on the page. And again, it might just like excite you. Like maybe if you find the perfect audiobook by a favorite author, then maybe you'll want to pick up the next one in text form. So I think just trying as many things, and don't feel like you have to only read a big, thick novel. Like just try different things, and hopefully you'll find one that you love that gets you to want to read even more.
Yeah, absolutely everything Janae said. My daughter is a reluctant reader, and so we've done all of those things, just trying every book. I mean, I tell her, it's not that you don't like reading, and it's not that you're not good at reading. You just haven't found your right book yet. So let's go back to the library. Let's go back to the bookstore and grab a few more, and I'll bring some home to her. She does like audiobooks, so we have ventured into the audiobooks. And yeah, that's what I would say. Just try everything. And graphic novels are a great option. She likes those as well. Nothing is off the table. Let's just get reading.
Agree. And I mean, there's graphic novels, and then there's so many different formats now. So there's hybrid novels, there's novels that have a lot of illustrations, or that just have like, words that pop. Like there's just so many different things that are happening now. So I think maybe 20 years ago, if you were like, I hate all books, people would be like, oh yeah, it's really hard. But now it's like, there's so many options. There's so many different ways to grab your attention and hold your attention. And so I think sometimes there's just a block, like, I know I won't like books, but if you sort of open yourself up to seeing what's out there, giving things a try, like my daughter, I will read out loud to her the first chapters of a bunch of books, and then she gets to pick like which one she wants to keep going with. So see if somebody can help you with that first chapter, just to find the book that sparks your interest. And then, reading really is, it's like a skill. And the more that you read, the better you will get at it. And the easier it will be to sort of just fall into the story instead of feeling like you have to force yourself through the story. So if you can find the books that turn you into a reader, whatever format it takes, then I think you'll just sort of see yourself boosting off without much effort.
I had one other thing to add too. You reminded me of something. I feel like today now there are also so many book adaptations of maybe your favorite characters in other mediums. Like if you love Star Wars, or if you love Marvel, like there are all these novelization, novels written by some of the best authors too, not just like a random story, but like, really well done, novel versions of a lot of these things. So that might be another way in. If you're a super big fan of some fandom, like you might find a book of that, and then that might be your way in too.
Yeah, I mean, I think as adults, maybe this is more advice for the adults, but like, don't roll your eyes at things like, well, I saw this on TV and I want to read about this TV character in a book. That's still reading. My daughter has gone, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is her favorite new show on Disney Plus, and now she wants to read the books. So that can be an avenue in, even though, some of us might consider that a backwards way to get there, but they're getting there.
Absolutely.
Right. There's so many shows like you have what's the one, the magic one, the series with Sarah Milanowski.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the name of the series.
On Disney Plus, and then there's Captain Underpants is a show.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's Benedict Society and a series of unfortunate events. So there's all these tie-ins that can sort of get you excited.
Yeah.
All right, so if y'all could, or if you do, write something other than middle grade, what would it be, or what is it?
It's funny because I mentioned earlier that I started out writing young adult novels that didn't end up getting published, but I honestly I really like middle grade. I'm so happy that I ended up making the switch. I think I have aspirations of writing maybe slightly younger, like chapter books, and maybe picture books. I feel like picture books are very it's like a whole other skill because it's like it's such short form that you have to really know what you're doing. But yeah, I would love to actually write younger, especially because I have a 6-year-old daughter and I've been reading a lot of chapter books with her and picture books. And so I would love to write like a series of chapter books one day for sure.
Yeah, me too. I tend to write younger. So I do have a picture book out that I wrote, and I write little poems for my daughter. They're sort of like Shel Silverstein-esque, just little poems that I started writing for her. And I recently published a collection of those.
That's
but
awesome.
I don't know that I could ever move into YA or adult because like Jess was saying, like I love the tone of middle grade. I love that sense of hope and encouragement in middle grade. And so I don't know if I can move away from that.
I have a picture book that comes out next September. It's my first
one. I saw that.
Yeah.
It's Christmas, isn't it?
It's a Christmas picture book. Yeah. So that was really fun. My publisher was sort of, looking around for a Christmas picture book. And I was like, I could write that. I love Christmas. So I tried my hand at it. And it is tricky. It's a whole different skill set.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not more work, obviously it's much fewer words and it doesn't take as long, but it's a whole different way of writing. So and then I also recently wrote some chapter book, some of the first in a possible series, so we'll see what happens with that. So I would go younger too. I've been trending downward. YA is a little bit scary for me. I don't think I'm going to be heading there anytime soon. And I do, like Christine, I just love the feel and the voice of the younger ages. So, and I have kids who are younger too. Maybe that'll change when I have older kids. Who knows? Or maybe I'll want to stay as far away from that angst as possible. I don't know.
Gosh. Well, ladies, we are out of time, if you can believe it or not. I only got about halfway through the questions I wanted to ask y'all, but I appreciate y'all so much sharing your time and talents with us and being part of the Trinity Prep Author Fest. And we are just delighted that you have been with us today. And we look forward to sharing your books with all of our readers and getting the books in the hands of young people. So thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
This is great.
Thank you. Y'all have a great day. Thanks again and have a wonderful holiday.
Thanks,
Thank
Georgia.
you.
It's upon us.
Christina, it was nice